I'm wondering if we can start with your really fascinating use of found sounds in your work. When did you first become aware that that was possible, that people did that and you could achieve what you were looking to achieve?
Well, you know what? I think it's a slightly complicated question for me because I started playing an instrument at a very early age, 6, 7, 6.5, and that became quite quickly, so to say, a professional dedication because I reckon that my early teachers figured that I have potentials to for violinism uh, on a professional level. So uh, this contact with sound started in a really early age. But I think my surrounding and growing up between Belgrade and Korčula, which are both quite distinctive environments, and at the time when Yugoslavia was falling apart, I literally grew up during the war.
Mm.
Between war between two countries that my parents were from, you know. So
Mm.
analogy would be like mixed marriage between Palestinian and Israeli in the middle of the war. So I was growing up in this environment, and I was exposed a lot to a lot of tension, and trying to travel between two countries were also very, I think, very distinctive and a strong emotional base for how I started to recognize my immediate environment, listening to it, watching it, experiencing it in a very direct way. So between these two countries, I was quite attracted to all sorts of, so to say, sound material, you know, from trying to gather old cassettes, trying to record myself, trying to record my immediate environment. So it was really early childhood. But I never thought that I would be doing this in my life because um, I was quite focused and single-minded about violinism. And then through my education, I finished two very hard music academies, and that was the only path really for me. At some point when I grew up, I decided to make a switch and go further and go out of these educational frames. And that is the moment when I'm realizing that field recording and sounds from immediate environment are something that I want to deal with deeply, not just on intellectual level, but more on cognitive level, or something that I really want to create with. And I think that started probably in the early 20s, so to say 20 years ago. When I first started making sound art for real, and so to say in a structure, in some sort of structure and continuity, that was only 6, 7 years ago.
Mm.
So
You graduated from the Belgrade Academy of Music in 2001 and went on
yes,
to study at the Royal College of Music, completing your
yes,
studies there in 2004. Do you
yes,
think that your classical training affected the way you listen to the environment around you?
absolutely, absolutely. But it was inevitable when you are psychologically formed in a structure of classical music, which is a vast content of vast musical content. It's also a psychological history of humankind as well. So, and when you become really good at it, and when you learn with distinguished mentors, and I really had some amazing teachers like world famous violinists, then you go really deeply into it. You go deeply into all the mechanisms, possible mechanisms, not just of interpreting music, but into listening, into the mechanisms of listening, and of course performing, because I'm more than everything. I'm firstly performer than anything else.
Is there a
So
specific experience that caused you to decide you were going to go outside of the classical world, or was that more of an evolution over time?
I think it was more situational, or being from Eastern Europe, in a moment when societies are in a quite problematic phases of transition, um, post-war, and from one system to another, from socialism to something else that we still don't know what is. What is it? Uh, there is a lot of situational elements, also how my private life evolved. So I think at some point I returned from the UK, and I was young enough to think that that is a good idea, which for classical music and classical career really wasn't the greatest idea, because I had a great come out in London and my career was going really great. I thought that I could continue that and then just move to Belgrade and continue. But in Belgrade, the structure for what I needed just wasn't there. So I started being interested in other things, connecting with people who are trying to change structurally the cultural environment. So I started organization that became a cultural activism body that turned into a network and a contemporary arts production, and that kind of took me to completely another field of work. And I think in the 15 years that I was dealing with that cultural management and building certain environment with my friends, better conditions for arts and culture in Belgrade taught me a lot. And it was an upgrade, but definitely put a lid on certain aspects of classical music performing. And then at a certain point, I started family, so traveling, touring, things like that became a bit more difficult. And at some point, I realized that I'm really trapped in a place where my career will not continue in a way I thought it would. And I decided to do with those means that, to work with those means that I have. And I completely switched to sound art because that was something I could do while raising kids, and in the environment that didn't have a great structure for classical music.
So both practical and artistic reasons to go in this direction.
Yes, I think also escape, like situational escape in life. Obviously, I had very developed creative processes in me, were quite mature at early age because of all of this performing. And obviously, it was impossible for me to let go and give up. I had a great urge to continue doing arts in any way I can, and this was the way that I came up with.
20 years ago, when you were studying, did you find that other students had interests in work outside of the classical world? Was this something that was discussed with other students? Were you listening to music that was different?
Uh, Not really. I was lucky well, Belgrade Academy was quite traditional surrounding, but I was lucky to have a companion in my crime. Ivana Grahovac is a great Serbian cellist, an improviser, also electronic music composer, and we started working together early. We were on the same class at the academy. We started experimental duo, and we were definitely outcasts on the academy, and we had our parallel lives. So we started this duo Eruption, which still exists. We live in different countries now, so we are not doing much together, but we are very close in life. So in a way, we brought something else to the classical music milieu in Belgrade, and we continue doing that. We traveled all around the world, gave hundreds and hundreds of improv concerts together and separately, and definitely digged a lot for the improv scene at that time. So when I came to London, also Royal College of Music was definitely more open. There were more opportunities, but was also very traditional environment. So we had to find a ways to just look for the scene that we were interested in.
I'm always struck by the the kind of music that artists like yourself who are classically trained can produce. There's a substance to it that I think others struggle to produce. Are you conscious of that? Do you think about what you were taught when you're working so far outside of what you were taught?
Yes, I'm becoming conscious of that by listening a lot to other people's works. And at certain age, if you're not capable of being objective and listening out of your ego, then there is probably not much point of doing it. I think in my case, I do try to suppress consciously a lot and undo many things that I learned in musical education, simply because I have the urge to experiment with the form, and I try to keep that as this field of risk to be able to reach this content that you're talking about. And recently, I think I feel much more comfortable about it. Before that, it was simply walking into the field that you don't know anything about. It's always a bit unpleasant. But in a way, performance teaches you that to have enough courage to just risk, to make this risk. I'm not sure that this content is directly connected with my musical education. I think it is more product of my personal experiences and quite a dense life that I had.
The risk is interesting because it's not just stepping out of a comfort zone into something that's new. It's stepping into something that's new that the large majority of music lovers would not even classify as music. So
Yes.
the novelty of this field must have added to that sense of intimidation.
Well, yes, definitely. I mean, in a way that it's something I consciously, it's a conscious decision. But it's not always right decision, but it suits my character
How
in a way.
so? What do you think is at the heart of the direction you've chosen to take?
Um, it could be this quite it's a huge curiosity in a way, and it also could be I'm not sure how to put it, but when you reach when you are taught, in music at early age, it develops certain something that I sometimes called musical mind, and the musical mind can be quite complex state. Um, so there is the point where you stop just being interpreter as a musician, and you crave for creation. I was lucky to start, early 20s, even a bit before, with improvisation. It's something that formed, that upgraded my musical mind in a great sense. And improvisation is a very specific, I think, position for artists to create. It's not just risk, it's this internal search and this eternal need to connect, to be able to produce something creative inside a musical event. So I don't know. I'm not quite sure, but I think that it's definitely product of everything I've been through in this musical life.
And in your life outside of music, as you say, having grown up in what's now the
Yeah.
former Yugoslavia, there's a parallel,
Yeah.
right? If you look at the early days of sound art and sound poetry, World War I factored very significantly in its evolution. And I wonder if just the kinetic nature of that childhood experience, surrounded by everything that was happening in your part of the world at that time, informed a view of the power of sound.
Yes, informs you on so many levels. I was, in a way, very much focused on sound as such, but it's a quite particular theme to talk about because it comes all to one thing, which is being exposed to a lot of human suffering. So that has to affect you, no matter how old the person is. Informs you cognitively, so you find ways to express yourself within that environment. It's not easy, especially not for children or young people, youth that are exposed to trauma or any sort of uh, situational, social or cultural situation or problematic environment. Mm, it definitely makes you listen better. Definitely informs you. Yeah, I would agree.
The most recent recording, you're a very prolific artist, as well as being a talented one. Each of the pieces is a name for a place not far from where you live. Tell me about
Yes.
the inspiration of this new project.
I think it is a compilation of moments that I think were quite strong by themselves. Uh, and these are the places that left mark um, in different way. Each has a little story of its own, and I think are quite powerful moments in both space and time and in my life. The first track that it's called Dubrovnik basically happened, I think, last year. I was in Dubrovnik, as you know, it's a very touristic place nowadays, and I was doing something there. It's just 3 hours by boat from where I live. It was such a great crowd in town, you couldn't walk or get anywhere. So I somehow managed to ran into a church because I know this is the only place where the wouldn't be no crowd, just to wait for this river of people to somehow move out of the center so I can get somewhere. And I ran into the church. It was such a great contrast from this ultimate turmoil to this very cool and quiet building. And I decided to record the ambience of it, although there were really little sounds in it, almost nothing, just few people whispering or someone walking by. And then at some point, uh, suppose, but the priest started playing music at the back of the altar, and it was really a experience that I didn't expect. So that is how the Dubrovnik piece started. which is the next one? I forgot. There is Avala, for example. This is the place I live. This is a little mountain next to Belgrade, only 20 minutes by car from Belgrade. It's quite distinguished place, a lot of nature. My friend Ivana, who I mentioned before, has really big house there. And we spend a lot of time there in my life recording the environment. So I'm very familiar with the place that I can freely call home in a way.
Do you
There
always
is
have
Zemun.
do you always have a recorder with you?
Yes, not always, but most of the time. Yeah.
You wrote something very interesting, that you're not overly concerned with high tech.
No, yeah, that's true. I'm
Why
not.
is that?
Because I am the high tech. I am the recording element. So I think that what I'm trying to record, um, it depends on how am I perceiving it more than how will record it, pick it up. The ordinary, like basic recorder, it's already sophisticated enough to take the information that we need to be able to compose with it. What I'm interested in, this information, in this data, is many layers, subtle layers that are not so obvious, So I strive in a way to connect with the moment and to remember that moment when I'm listening to recording what was exactly happening to me in that point, and in interaction with the environment. So, there is not a huge difference between basic recorded and super high tech recorded because the data is there. What will you do with it really depends on you, your mind, and your decisions, and how you decide to deal with things. So that is the basis of that story for me, and that's something that I really try to when I talk to people to kind of underline. High tech is bringing maybe good resolution to our ears, but ears are not the only means of listening. It's actually, probably at the back of my list, when listening is in question.
What's at the front?
This sort of sensorial state that lets me in, let me dive into the environment, into the moment. It definitely has to do with awareness of the body on a slightly different level than just, I think skin is involved a lot, and emotional structure or cognitive, means.
So
And
a
for me,
multi-sensory feel of a space. Is that what you're trying to capture?
it's a feeling, but it's feeling put on a slightly lower level, on a more basic energetical level, in a way that you are, I'm not sure how to say that without sounding a bit cuckoo, but you are sensing the environment with your mind in a way. That's probably the closest way.
The new album is part of a series called Stories Untold. What's the idea behind the series?
Stories Untold is it will be the poetry collection. My last poetry collection came out in 2008, and this is the next one. So it's quite a gap in between. So in this gap, I write poetry all the time, same as I make music. It's a slightly different creative process, is in a slightly different means of expression, and it needs time. Um, So Stories Untold will be a book, a poetry collection. And I mean, I already have enough, but with poetry, you wait for the moment when it's ready, and then you know. There is no really, a great planning about poetry. So you just wake up one day and okay, that's it.